A day that began with a class field trip ended with a parent's worst nightmare. Family and friends worked with local police and the FBI in an urgent search for a missing daughter. An unlikely suspect eventually emerged in the girl's disappearance. Faced with conflicting testimony, the FBI would need to rely on forensic evidence to convict a predator.
The parents of 11-year-old Brittany Martinez knew their daughter was no runaway. But that was all they knew. Something had happened to her, something terrible. When they failed to find Brittany in their quiet Illinois neighborhood, they called the police. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI was soon brought in to grapple with conflicting witness reports, false leads, and a lack of clues. Agents wouldn't stop until they found Brittany and the truth.
Chicago, Illinois, and its surrounding suburbs are home to roughly 10 million residents of various backgrounds and income. People settled here to take advantage of Chicago's economic and cultural opportunities. Families from Chicago's nearby suburb of Elgin were no exception. At about 5 p.m. on May 8, 1997, Wendy Howlett returned to Elgin with her 5-year-old son and her 11-year-old daughter, Brittany Martinez, after enjoying the day at Chicago's Shed Aquarium. The mother of two had chaperoned her daughter's 5th grade class on a field trip to the famous institution.
She was just all excited about her field trip to the Shed Aquarium. And I had 5 of her girlfriends with me. They had a great time. They liked the sharks, the turtles. We had lunch outside, seen the boats, seen planes going by. Brittany just had a wonderful time.
Brittany and her friends were eager to play outside on the first warm day of spring. The 5th grader was her mother's eldest from a previous marriage. While upstairs with her son, Wendy heard her daughter call up from the street. Brittany asked if she could go to a nearby park.
I looked down the window and she was looking up and I said, no, you can't go, you know, because I thought she was maybe just going with one friend and she actually went with 5 and I'm like, okay, there's a group, you can go. Just be back by 6 o'clock.
All right, have fun.
The park was only 2 blocks away. Her son was too young to go with them, so Wendy offered to take him to his Aunt Pam's new house for a short visit. Since Pam lived in the neighborhood, the walk would be brief. On the way out, Wendy left Brittany a note, then bumped into her downstairs neighbor. She told him that if he saw Brittany return before 6 o'clock, her daughter had 2 options: wait for her mother upstairs or come to her Aunt Pam's house alone. 45 minutes later, Wendy had returned from Pam's without seeing Brittany. She figured she was still at the park with her friends. Wendy fixed a quick meal for her son while she waited for her brother to pick her up for work. At about 20 after 6, her husband, Scott Howlett, came home from his job. Scott would watch the kids when Wendy worked part-time in the evenings with her brother as a custodian.
And he walked in and I said, well, I got to go to work now. Brittany's at the park with her friends. And he looked at me and said, no, she's not. Her friends are outside.
Wendy's heart sank. She went to the window to check with Brittany's friends.
And they all looked up at me and said, she went on her bike to Aunt Pam's house, to where you are. I said, well, I'm home. Have you seen her since? They're like, no.
Brittany's friends said they'd returned from the park a little while ago. Wendy called her sister-in-law, Pam.
Hey, Pam? You seen Brittany? No, I seen her in the park. About half an hour ago.
But Brittany had not shown up yet. The family went off in search of her.
It wasn't normal for Brittany not to call me. From like 6 to 6:30, I'd normally know where she's at. So that was unusual to begin with for my daughter not to be in contact with me.
It also wasn't like Brittany to be out alone. In a few hours, it would be dark.
My husband left to start searching on foot, thinking maybe she could have been at this park still, on the way to Aunt Pam's or something. We didn't know. When we didn't find her by like 8 o'clock, a mother's instinct, I knew there was a problem.
Wendy called 911. Elgin patrol units were immediately dispatched. Sergeant Robert Beater of the Elgin Police Department was a detective at the time. He knew that when police respond quickly, they usually find the minor unharmed.
Anytime we receive a phone call regarding a missing child, we take it pretty seriously. Initially, we make contact with the people who call us. In every case, we normally search the residence, the person's residence, inside, just in case, to cover the bases in case the person is hiding under the bed or in the closet, and that's happened in the past.
That wasn't the case with Brittany. Wendy told officers that her daughter was last seen wearing jeans, a blue t-shirt, yellow socks, and white sneakers. Police had to consider the possibility that Brittany had simply run away.
They started asking me about my daughter, and they're like, well, are you sure she's not at a friend's house? I said, the friends she would have been at, they're right there. They started asking me, are you sure she didn't run away? Was she angry? Was she mad? I'm like, no, we had an awesome day all day. She was with her friends, and it's not like my daughter not to notify me this long.
Investigators next questioned the Howlett's downstairs neighbor. He said that Brittany and her friends came back from the park at about 5:50, 20 minutes before Wendy had returned from her sister-in-law Pam's house. The neighbor said he gave Brittany the message from her mother. She could wait upstairs or go to her Aunt Pam's alone. According to him, Brittany seemed excited about going to see her aunt. Five minutes later, the 23-year-old neighbor said he was inside his apartment when he heard Brittany struggling to drag her bicycle up the basement stairs. He went out to give the 11-year-old a hand with her bike. Once they were on the street, Brittany thanked him and rode off toward her Aunt Pam's house. The neighbor never saw her after that. As word of Brittany's disappearance spread, more police and family members continued to gather to help in the search. At around 9 o'clock, Wendy's younger brother, Eddie Milka, pulled up. Brittany's uncle was shocked by the news. He told his worried sisters that he had also seen Brittany outside the apartment at around 6 o'clock when he had stopped by to pick up Wendy for work. He'd gone to work alone when he learned Wendy wasn't home. Milka said he would go to search for his niece at the park. Investigators continued to question people who lived close by, hoping someone had seen something that could point them in the right direction. But no one else had seen the 11-year-old on her bike after she left her house.
Neighbors were reporting no type of disturbance or any unusual activity in the neighborhood. It was a very nice day, kids out playing. There was just no signs of her being taken from the scene by force. So we were very concerned.
The searchers fanned out in every possible direction the fifth grader could have wandered. They began in the park where Brittany and her friends had been playing. A helicopter joined overhead. Other volunteers searched dumpsters and alleys in the area. Brittany and her bicycle seemed to have disappeared without a trace. As the night wore on, the searchers straggled back, weary and discouraged. Wendy remained at home, hoping for news on her daughter's whereabouts.
During that search, I wanted to go out and help search, and they advised me that I should stay home just in case she called, or maybe it could have been a ransom or whatever. So I stayed home, as hard as it was, and no phone calls, no nothing. My husband, my mom, my sisters, they were all out searching here, going to parks. They continued to search all night.
Wendy did her best to remain composed. But after 6 hours of fruitless searching, the mother was distraught.
She was very upset, very emotional, very concerned, just at wit's end, just didn't know where to turn. We tried to reassure her that, we're doing everything we can. We're not going to give up on this. We're going to keep going and going and going until we find her.
Once again, investigators turned their attention to the interior of the building for clues. In the basement, they were surprised to find Brittany's bike. The chain was unsecured. It wasn't like Brittany to leave it unlocked.
So, you heard it? Or heard her bring
The bike was Brittany's prized possession. The neighbor told police he never saw Brittany return after she rode off.
So you hear her come down the steps normal.
Investigators believe that the bike must have been returned before 6:20 when Scott Howlett, Brittany's stepfather, came home from work. Hoping for a lead, several officers returned to the station to search the database. Illinois state law requires that all convicted child molesters register with the local police. Investigators sought past offenders whose records might point to a likely suspect.
Obviously, your number one concern would be if there's anybody in the area that could be prone to this type of behavior, taking a young child. So we naturally assume, let's cover the base with sex offenders.
They discovered that a registered sex offender was known to reside a few blocks away from the missing girl's apartment. Local officers knew the man was currently homeless and lived in his van. They also knew where he usually parked at night. If the missing girl was inside, investigators didn't want to provoke him to do anything desperate. Brittany was not there. Nothing inside indicated Brittany had ever been in the van. He claimed to have no knowledge of the missing girl and gave the detectives an account of his activities that day. His alibi checked out.
Thanks. No, thank you. Have a nice night.
Officers re-interviewed family and friends in the slim hope that they might offer something new that could help. Wendy's parents, Brittany's maternal grandparents, lived a few miles away with their 20-year-old son, Eddie Milka. No one had seen Brittany since Eddie had at about 6 o'clock.
The family believed Eddie was one of the last persons to see her. We wanted to find out further information that Brittany might have relayed to him, that she was going somewhere, or maybe he dropped her somewhere or something, anything that he might have been able to tell us.
Eddie Milka appeared tired, but detectives wanted to get a more detailed statement while his memory was still fresh. When police asked him to provide one back at the station, the missing girl's uncle was offended.
He blurted out, "Why do you guys think I took Brittany?" We're kind of taken aback by that because it was an unusual statement. We weren't accusing him of anything, we're just asking for his help.
Despite the offense and the late hour, Eddie agreed to talk to them at the station. Anything to help investigators locate Brittany.
Mind if we take a look in your car? Sure.
He also allowed police to search the car he'd been driving to quell whatever suspicions they may have had.
In that type of a search, you'd take a look and see if anything would draw your attention to the car. Maybe some item of clothing that she was wearing at the time. Not that we expected to find that in there, but we need to explore all avenues. There was a garbage can in the back seat of the car. There was a vacuum cleaner in the trunk of the car. And it didn't surprise us because Wendy had told us that that's what they do. She and Eddie clean places at night generally.
Eddie accompanied the police to the station. Detectives hoped he'd have the answers they needed to find his missing niece. Brittany Martinez was still out there, somewhere, and investigators didn't know if she was dead or alive. In the early morning hours of May 9th, 1997, Wendy Howlett's 11-year-old daughter, Brittany Martinez, had been missing from her Elgin, Illinois home for almost 11 hours. Extensive searches and interviews through the night had turned up no trace of the missing girl. Desperate, Wendy Howlett reached out to the community for help.
We called the Polyclass organization. They sent us information and what to do and what procedures to follow to get her picture on the internet for those missing and exploited children. We started calling any of the news channels to see if they can get her picture on TV, to see if someone maybe seen her. If one news station said no, we called the next one.
Chicago morning news programs broadcast appeals to the public to be on the lookout for the brown-haired 11-year-old. Authorities set up a hotline, hoping for the call that would lead them to Brittany. Like many in the community, Elgin Police Detective Robert Beater was deeply troubled by the case.
This investigation was particularly difficult because of it involved a small child. She was 11 years old, and actually at the time, my oldest son, was 11 years old, and it kind of hit home. When you first get these cases, 99 times out of 100, you can find the person rather quickly. So as time goes on, it just became very draining to try to determine where this person's at.
Okay, Eddie, tell me what happened that evening.
Racing against time, detectives turned to Brittany's uncle, Eddie Milka, for help. Although the 20-year-old janitor had been up all night, detectives asked him to detail what he could remember about the last time he saw his niece. He said that at around 6 p.m., he arrived to pick up Brittany's mother, Wendy, who was supposed to help him clean a building that night. Eddie recalled seeing his niece outside with her bike. He asked where her mother was. Brittany said that her mother was not home. Eddie couldn't wait for his sister. He had to be at work, so he said goodbye, hugged his niece, then left at around 6:15. He said he wasn't sure if Brittany had taken her bike inside afterwards. At about 6:45, Eddie stopped at a convenience store to buy a pack of cigarettes before work. He stayed at work until 8:30 and discovered that Brittany was missing at about 9. He had searched 2 parks that night where he knew Brittany often played. But like the rest of the family, he turned up nothing. Afterwards, he stopped by the house of some friends and admitted smoking marijuana with them. Now he was exhausted and wanted to get some sleep.
At some point in the interview, he said, "Listen, guys, you're just going to have to let me go because I don't have anything else to tell you. I'm tired. I want to go home." And at this point, it was like a 3-hour interview, and we didn't have any reason to keep him there, so then we brought him home.
With time working against them, Elgin police contacted the Chicago field office of the FBI.
That was pretty recent.
From experience, FBI Special Agent Beth Malarkey knew that if Brittany was not found in the first 24 hours, the girl's chances of survival were slim.
The initial hours are incredibly crucial. We all know in law enforcement, and having worked previous kidnapping cases, that the longer the child goes missing, the less likelihood there is of recovering the child, certainly alive. And our mission is to recover a live child.
The FBI offered local authorities additional manpower, plus a computer system that helped organize, cross-reference, and manage leads. These resources became increasingly valuable as calls flooded in.
There were hundreds of leads that were called in by the public because of a number that was disseminated to the public for anyone having information. All of those leads were cataloged and checked. People's alibis were checked.
Investigators decided to follow up on Eddie Milka's alibi as well. They spoke to the president of the company whose building Eddie was scheduled to clean the night before. The executive had worked late that night and saw no one else in the building. When he locked up at 8:15, the president's car was the only one in the lot. Investigators also checked the convenience store where Milka said he bought cigarettes. The store was equipped with a 24-hour surveillance camera. The detective scanned the video recorded on May 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. He never saw Brittany's uncle enter the store. Eddie Milka had lied about his whereabouts.
The other family members were interviewed, and what they told us turned out to be true. All their whereabouts were accounted for. Other people were able to verify their statements. Everything that Edward Milka told us turned out not to be true.
But the discovery that Milka had lied did not prove wrongdoing, nor did it put investigators any closer to finding the young girl. It had been almost 24 hours since Brittany was reported missing.
Now, can I get a copy of
Investigators continued to pursue all viable leads.
By this time, we were just getting continuous telephone leads, the citizens calling in, community calling in, assisting us with possible information. Maybe they saw her somewhere.
Witnesses reported seeing Brittany in many locations throughout the region, including a restaurant. The police dispatched officers to check each sighting. The public and investigators alike clung to hope that Brittany was still alive. Each time officers responded, they were disappointed. Police found only conflicting stories and unconfirmed accounts. By the end of the first day, investigators were forced to consider the possibility that they were no longer looking for a live victim. May 10th, 1997, marked the second day that Elgin, Illinois police and the FBI searched for missing 11-year-old Brittany Martinez. Since Brittany had now been missing for over 36 hours, the possibility that she had met a violent end became more likely. The last person to have seen her was her uncle, Eddie Milka. Elgin detective Robert Beater could not eliminate Milka as a suspect.
Eddie Milka was always a question. It was always a question on his behavior. It was always a question on his statements that he told us. And all the other leads that we were getting in, they were quickly resolved.
But no one had seen Milka talking to Brittany outside her home, as Milka himself had claimed.
Thanks.
Elgin police detective Brian Gorkowski realized that unless Brittany or her body was recovered, investigators had no physical evidence that she'd been harmed.
We suspected that this was a kidnapping maybe at some point or a child abduction, but again, we had no tangible things to say, this is a murder. We had no body. We had no smoking gun, if you will. That was very difficult for me.
On the morning of May 10th, Detective Gorkowski received a page from Brittany's mother, Wendy. She said that her brother, Eddie Milka, wanted to talk to police again.
We wanted to re-interview Eddie Milka. We wanted him to come in and talk to us voluntarily, and if he did do that, we wanted as much information about his background, his past, as we could gather. So we were very pleased that she did give us this background.
Wendy Howlett described Eddie as slow. He had attended a special high school for the learning disabled. As far as she knew, Eddie had few friends and no girlfriends. Investigators met with the 20-year-old in the police department's family interview room.
Feel all right? Okay, yes.
They asked him what he wanted to tell them. The detectives were pleased by Eddie Milka's response.
Milka told us he had lied. I mean, initially, right off the bat in the beginning of this conversation, and that he was now going to tell us the truth. Well, at that point, I got a little excited because I like when someone I'm going to interview tells me they lied. Because at that point, I know that we can get everything behind us, we can start getting the truth out, we can be open, there can be some honest dialogue between the two of us.
He admitted that when he saw Brittany, he was under the influence of marijuana. But he maintained that he had left his niece in front of her apartment at about 6:15 when he drove off to work. Milka told detectives that when he pulled into work, he saw his boss's car and wanted to avoid him since he was high. He claimed that he didn't enter the office building until 8:15 when his boss left. Detectives knew this version couldn't be true.
We confronted him with the workplace lie. You weren't in the workplace at 8:15 p.m. We know that because the owner said there was no one inside that business when he had left. Milka told us, you know, you might be right. There may be some time difference here.
But Milka didn't elaborate. If he knew where Brittany was, he wasn't forthcoming. Investigators tried a new tack.
Let's take our time.
I asked him to imagine where Brittany was at this point in time because he was the last one to see her. He began to rub his temples, he closed his eyes, and then he said she was in Elgin, then she was near Elgin, that she was cold and wet. He continued to reiterate that constantly. We asked if she was breathing. He said that she was not. We asked if she was bleeding. He told us no, she wasn't bleeding.
Milka asked for a cigarette.
I know she's dead.
He started pacing and mumbling, then asked the detective to write down what he was about to say. Milka claimed he was having a vision of Brittany in an old gray car with two men who were drinking beer. He also saw farmhouses, a dirt road, gravel, rocks, and a creek. He added that the men had touched her all over, but he didn't stop there.
After he had told me that he had seen these two males touching Brittany, he then told me, I know she's dead, I want to tell my sister she's dead, grabbed me, hugged me, and began to cry.
Eddie?
Wendy Howlett was called down to the station.
Have a seat here.
She noticed her brother had been crying and asked what he had to tell her.
Something that he wants to share with you.
Once again, Eddie Milka changed his story.
He just looked up at me and said, I didn't do it. I don't, they're putting things in my head. I just want to go home. I just want to go home. They're telling me Brittany's dead. Brittany's still alive. We got to find her.
Since Milka never admitted any wrongdoing in his vision statement, police had nothing to hold him on. Wendy took her brother home. Investigators questioned the two friends Milka said he had smoked marijuana with on the day Brittany disappeared. They confirmed that they'd been with Eddie until 10 minutes to 6 when he left for work. Milka told them that he would be back later to watch the Bulls game. When he returned at approximately 10:30 that night, Milka was upset and crying. He told them that his niece Brittany was missing. They then drank a few beers and watched the rest of the Bulls game. Eddie left their house at about 1 a.m. The friends had nothing more to add. Investigators still had no evidence that Milka had abducted Brittany, and no clue as to where she might be now.
And then, a week goes by and we still haven't determined what happened to her. She could have been found somewhere. She could have been taken and then released. And that's how some of these cases work out. Some of the more dangerous ones, the person takes them and then releases them a later time.
On May 17th, 1997, 9 days after Brittany disappeared, a couple was boating on the Kishwaukee River, 18 miles outside of Elgin, when they made a grisly discovery. They found the body of a girl washed up on a sandbar. She was naked from the waist up and severely decomposed. The terrified couple made for shore and then ran to call the police. On May 17, 1997, 9 days after 11-year-old Brittany Martinez was reported missing from her Elgin, Illinois home, a young girl's body was discovered 18 miles away in the Kishwaukee River. Lieutenant Gene Lowry of the McHenry County Sheriff's Department investigated.
At the time, we weren't sure if it was Brittany Martinez or not. I knew from screening the missing cases that come through our jurisdiction at the Sheriff's Department, we didn't have any missing females that would be within that age range. So we began to look outside of our jurisdiction and other police agencies to determine what, if any, missing persons might fit that description.
The nearby Elgin police and FBI were called in to determine if the dead girl was Brittany. FBI Special Agent Beth Malarkey believed they had finally found her.
Those of us who were involved in the investigation and knew the description of Brittany, what she looked like, what her hair looked like, the clothes that she was wearing when she was missing. Although the body that was found on the sandbar was missing a t-shirt, the rest of it very much resembled Brittany Martinez. The dark hair, the blue jeans, the socks, and the tennis shoes that she was wearing.
It was impossible to visually identify the victim or to immediately determine how she had died. Investigators could see no external wounds.
Long time.
They believed she had likely been killed elsewhere than dumped in the river.
Too much.
You know, what
A little bit.
The mood amongst the investigators was grim.
It just became very sad because the reality of having a dead child and the investigation changing from a missing child to possibly a murdered child changed the whole tone of the investigation.
The surrounding area struck Detective Brian Gorkowski as similar to the place Eddie Milka had described earlier in his vision statement.
The scene of the Kishwaukee River at that point seems more like a creek or a small body of water, not necessarily what you would picture a river to be. There were rocks, there was dirt roads in the area, there was farmhouses. The landscape very much depicted what Eddie had told me in the vision statement.
To confirm that Milka's vision statement was not a coincidence, they needed proof that could link him to this location. The FBI's evidence recovery team, specialists in crime scene forensics, were called in. It was the same unit that sifted through the debris of Pan Am Flight 103 and the Oklahoma City bombing.
The ERT is very highly trained and professional and organized in how they conduct crime scene searches. And because this looked like a murder investigation at this point, every piece of evidence was going to be extremely important.
The forensic technicians took soil, water, and plant samples, as well as samples of the insects that had colonized the body. Based on the development of these larvae, scientists determined that the victim died no later than 2 p.m. on May 9th, the day after Brittany disappeared. That night, Wendy Howlett prayed it wasn't Brittany.
I still was trying to keep hope that it wasn't my daughter. And I was hoping it was no one else. It was someone's little girl, but I was hoping it wasn't mine.
2 days later, dental records confirmed that the remains were, in fact, those of Brittany Martinez. A forensic pathologist determined that she had died of asphyxiation. 2 strips of tape were removed from her face and mouth. A large bruise with scalloped edges was found on her cheek. To investigators, it resembled a bite mark. The examiner noted that Brittany's jeans were only half zipped and her underwear was on inside out. He found 2 lacerations on the hymen. The pathologist concluded that the 5th grader had been sexually assaulted immediately before or at the time of her death. It would take several more months to process Brittany's clothing and tissue samples at the FBI lab. Special Agent Malarkey wanted to make sure that the analysis was thorough.
I have to say that I didn't sleep for several days after that, because seeing her, seeing the state that she was in, and understanding the magnitude of what took place.
Detective Robert Beater hoped the discovery of Brittany's body and clothing would provide the physical evidence they needed to catch her killer.
When it was final, at that point we could notify the families and really start digging our heels and focusing on some of the evidence we had already recovered.
For the past 11 days, Wendy Howlett had nourished the hope that her child was still alive. Now, that hope was dashed. The Howletts' worst fears had come true.
When they told me that it was my daughter, it is the worst feeling that you ever want to know. I can't even describe the pain that it goes through, because that was my only girl. And I wish this upon no one, not even my worst enemy do I wish this upon. And like an hour after my daughter, they confirmed that it was her, I went into her room and started breaking things. And then I got even more upset because I was breaking her things, and I still was hoping she was alive, even though I knew she wasn't.
Investigators speculated on why Brittany's body had come to rest in a river 18 miles from her home. Lieutenant Jean Lowry asked Brittany's mother if the location seemed significant.
And at that time, she had indicated that her father was an employee of the Milwaukee Railroad and had since been retired or disabled, and the family spent many summers at the Railroad Museum in Union, Illinois, a very, very short distance from where Brittany Martinez's body was found.
Eddie Milka had spent time there as well. Investigators secured a warrant for samples of his blood, saliva, and hair. They were forwarded to the FBI lab so examiners could begin the lengthy work of DNA mapping. Milka's genetic profile would be ready for comparison to any foreign DNA recovered from Brittany or her clothing. A forensic dentist also took impressions of Milka's teeth. Investigators suspected the mold would match the bite mark found on Brittany's cheek. The dentist compared the cast to a blown-up photo of the indentations on the victim's face. The two appeared to match. But due to advanced decomposition, the bite mark was distorted, so the dentist could not be absolutely certain Milka's teeth had made the mark. The results were inconclusive. Authorities still lacked the physical evidence needed to make an arrest. They obtained a warrant to search the impounded Lincoln town car they believe Milka had used to drive Brittany to the river. Soil samples collected from the wheel wells were found to be too common to prove where the car had been. Investigators hoped something on the inside would be more promising. Among the clutter in the back seat, agents found a paper cup from a fast food restaurant. Its lid was stained red with what appeared to be blood. The lid also held a partial palm print that matched Eddie Milka's. Brittany's fingerprint, along with her mother's, were found as well. Matted in the fibers of the backseat floor mat, they found more red stains. Agents secured samples of fibers from the floor mat and upholstery. More than 140 items were collected from the car and forwarded to the growing caseload at the FBI lab. Since the lab would take months to complete tests, Lieutenant Lowry asked Brittany's relatives to recall if anyone had been injured inside the car. Brittany's maternal grandmother, Milka, remembered that the 11-year-old had had a nosebleed in the car on the day of a family outing. Brittany's other grandmother said she was also there that day but did not recall the incident.
The Milka family painted it as, yes, there was a bloody nose in the vehicle, and these circumstances occurred. The other side of the family painted a dramatically different picture, that there was absolutely no evidence of a bloody nose.
Family members on the two sides were lining up against each other. The Milkas believed that Eddie could not have killed Brittany.
The hardest part of this investigation is the fact that our suspect was a family member. That obviously causes family problems when you suspect another family member of being the suspect in a case. That became difficult to overcome because we wanted the family's cooperation, and it's difficult for the family to keep cooperating when one of their own becomes a suspect.
Though circumstantial evidence pointed to Eddie Milka, contradictory stories and no confirmed physical evidence meant that investigators might never be able to charge Brittany's uncle with her murder. By early December 1997, 6.5 months had passed since the body of 11-year-old Brittany Martinez was discovered in a river 18 miles from her home. Her uncle, 20-year-old Eddie Milka, was the prime suspect and agreed to provide tissue samples, though his side of the family believed he was not responsible. Without substantial physical evidence, it would be difficult for the FBI and local investigators to charge him with murder. Examiners at the FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C. had spent months sifting through hundreds of pieces of trace evidence collected during the investigation. Karen Lanning, a scientist in the FBI's Trace Evidence Unit, received Brittany's clothing and coordinated the examination.
The evidence was processed in one of our scraping rooms, which is a room where we put the items of evidence. Victims and suspects are kept separately. Items from a scene are in a separate room so that we're not contaminating anything.
Lanning examined Brittany's socks, underwear, and jeans. Each item was scraped in the search for hairs or fibers foreign to the clothing. On the inside of the jeans, the examiner discovered one thin nylon fiber, a fiber distinctly different from the denim. She would compare the questioned fiber to a known sample from the carpet in Milka's car. The fibers matched. In 4 additional tests, her results were the same. Investigators theorized that Brittany had been in Milka's car with her jeans removed, since the carpet fiber was found inside of her jeans. But the fiber match alone was not enough to prove the theory, since that type of fiber was common to many cars.
I couldn't say the fiber came from that carpeting as opposed to another carpeting just like it. So if there were 2 cars that were the same, I can't say it's from car A versus car B.
Investigators hoped the remaining evidence would prove more conclusive. Special Agent Melissa Smers, chief of the Mitochondrial DNA Unit 2 at the FBI laboratory, was a serology and nuclear DNA examiner at the time. It was her task to determine if any of the victims' or suspects' fluids were present on the evidence. She found Brittany's clothing too contaminated to test.
Brittany had been dead for approximately 9 days before she was found. Because of that, she had started to decompose, and the clothing that she had on her showed evidence of that decomposition.
Agent Smers instead focused on the red stains found on the fast food cup and carpet taken from Milka's car. She determined that the stains were human blood. Through DNA testing, she'd find out whose. The examiner compared known samples of Eddie Milka's and Brittany's DNA to that found on the cup and carpet. Agent Smurs concluded that the blood in the car had come from Brittany. The probability that someone else had bled on the cup was at least 6.4 million to 1. It was enough to issue a warrant for Eddie Milka's arrest. On December 18, 1997, over 7 months after Brittany disappeared, Eddie Milka was charged with murder, aggravated kidnapping, and predatory criminal assault of a child. His arrest took his sister Wendy Howlett by surprise.
I not only lost my daughter, I am now losing my brother to something I know he didn't do, and I was more stunned and in shock than anything that, you know, this can't be happening. This nightmare's got to end somewhere.
In order to protect her brother, Wendy Howlett said that it was unlikely that Eddie would have driven to the river in McHenry County since he had never been there before. She told Lieutenant Gene Lowry that the railroad museum the Milkas went to as kids was not in that area as she had previously stated.
Wendy began to change her story for whatever reason and backed off on that statement. That, again, forced us to re-interview her and try and determine, you know, where she was in regard to that statement, because it would be key in determining what the connection was to McHenry County.
James McAuliffe of the McHenry County State's Attorney's Office knew the trial would be difficult. Two of the key witnesses, Eddie's sister Wendy and Eddie's mother, would testify on the suspect's behalf.
I have those expert reports.
We had to impeach some very sympathetic people for whom our hearts went out, but we had no alternative because they had changed their story so much. So we had to, in effect, attack our own witnesses and members of the family who had suffered such a terrible loss. It made it extremely difficult for us. It made it extremely difficult for the Milka and Howlett family and all the members who testified.
On April 21st, 2000, nearly 3 years after Brittany's death, the case of the state versus Edward Milka went to trial. The prosecution called more than 50 witnesses. In closing arguments, prosecutors told the jury how they believed the murder had taken place. They believed Eddie Milka had helped Brittany return her bike to the basement. In her haste, she left it unlocked, but took the cup she'd carried since coming home from her field trip. In the past, Brittany had sometimes accompanied her mother and uncle on cleaning jobs to help pay for the bike she loved so much. The prosecution believed Eddie drove to a nearby forest preserve after he saw his boss's car parked at work. There, prosecutors contended, he sexually assaulted his niece and likely smothered her until she died, then dumped her body in the Kishwaukee River.
The defendant, Edward Milka.
The jury was not convinced Eddie Milka had planned to kill Brittany.
When the jury retired and they came back, they entered a finding of not guilty on the first-degree murder. They felt that he had not intentionally murdered his niece.
Felony murder.
On the second charge of murder while in commission of a felony sexual assault, the jury found Edward Milka guilty. Many investigators, including Lieutenant Lowry, sympathized with Wendy Howlett's loss. The verdict provided little comfort to her family.
This is a tragedy, a human tragedy. There's no other way to cut it. As a father, I can tell you, if I had to experience this, I don't know if I could survive it. So for her as a mother, my heart goes out to her.
Edward Milka was sentenced to 75 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. His crime tore a close family apart. When young Brittany was killed, no one could hear her scream. But with the FBI's forensic experts on the trail, the story of Brittany's final hours could be told. And her killer brought to justice. In Kokomo, Indiana, an unthinkable crime terrified residents. A young woman disappeared, apparently kidnapped. After several days of searching, a former FBI profiler narrowed the suspect list to one. Agents and detectives followed the trail across state lines, hoping to find the victim before her time ran out.
Drops of blood and a torn window screen were all that was left to tell authorities what happened to a woman in Indiana. The 21-year-old victim was snatched from her home on a bright spring morning. She appeared to have no real enemies. There was no clear motive. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In an abduction case, every second counts. This case was plagued by false leads and blind alleys, each one using up valuable time as agents raced to find the victim.
Late spring 1998, Howard County, Indiana. The rural Midwestern farming region was already enduring its first heat wave of the season. Those who weren't farmers stayed inside to avoid the heat. 21-year-old Anita Wooldridge was one of them.
Could you hold on for a second? Thanks.
She planned to have lunch with her grandparents and boyfriend before her afternoon shift at a shipping company. Her boyfriend was supposed to pick her up at around noon.
I have to go. Okay.
But she would never make it. At about 12:30, Anita's mother returned home from work. She was surprised to see her daughter's boyfriend standing out front. Anita's car was gone, but it was unlike her daughter to miss an appointment or to leave the garage door open. Her mother also noticed that the screen from the kitchen window that faced the garage had been removed. Perhaps someone had broken into the house. The front door was unlocked.
Anita!
Anita was nowhere to be found.
Anita! Anita!
In the kitchen, Mrs. Wooldridge spotted blood on the kitchen table and floor.
Oh my God. Yes, I need...
She called 911. Howard County Sheriff's Chief Detective Steve Rogers responded to the call.
I don't know that any of us really knew exactly what we had at that time. We just knew that we had some very suspicious circumstances. We had what appeared to be possibly a forced entry in that the screen had been removed, and that some blood indicated that there could have been a violent act.
The detective issued an APB for Anita and her blue sedan and called in a forensic team that included officers from the nearby city of Kokomo. Technicians recorded the scene while the evidence was still fresh. They retrieved blood from the kitchen, but could not determine if it was Anita's without a sample from the missing girl. The screen found in the garage had been forced out from the kitchen window. Investigators dusted the area for prints. None that were lifted yielded any clues. Detectives interviewed Anita's parents to learn more about their daughter. They described her as a responsible young woman who held a steady job and who would never break plans without calling.
We had a missing person that was responsible and would not have just run off. We found nothing in our interviews with witnesses, talking to family members, that Anita had any problems at home, that she would have just taken off without any explanation.
Okay, good. I need to know what your
The detective questioned Anita's boyfriend, who she had been dating for several months.
I came over here.
He claimed to have arrived at Anita's at about 11:45 and had been there for 45 minutes when her mother pulled up.
Just hanging out. Pick up Anita.
Before that, he had been with friends until around 11.
11:45.
Okay, tell me about you and Anita, how you two get along.
That left 90 minutes during which his activities could not be corroborated. He had no idea where Anita might be and agreed to come to the station for further questioning if necessary.
We were fine. It was boyfriend, girlfriend.
Authorities examined Anita's bedroom. Mrs. Wooldridge pointed out that Anita's work clothes were still there. She spoke to her daughter's supervisor, but he said Anita had not yet arrived.
Supervisor's name is Mr. Johnson, 451-2345.
The detective called again to see if she had ever shown up.
Her employer told us that, she shows up when she's got a cold, she works when she's not feeling well, she's very dependable, and then the fact that she didn't show up for work that particular day was very significant.
Mrs. Wooldridge said that the only thing missing from Anita's room was a red bathrobe that she had recently embroidered for her daughter. Forensic technicians retrieved hair samples from Anita's brush to begin the lengthy process of mapping her DNA. In the bathroom, Anita had left her glasses and contacts behind. She couldn't drive without them, but her car and her keys were gone. Mr. and Mrs. Wooldridge had also discovered that their bed had been stripped of its comforter and the sheets were rumpled. Investigators suspected that Anita may have been raped there. Forensic technicians processed the room for any physical evidence.
Okay.
They examined the bed with ultraviolet light, searching for seminal fluid on the sheets and blankets. The bedding was clean. In the garage, a detective found a wad of electrical tape. Long strands of hair that resembled Anita's were tangled inside. Police suspected it had been wrapped around the victim's head to hold a gag. If that were true, it may have meant that Anita was taken from the house alive. Detectives spread out from the house looking for witnesses.
There was a neighborhood search conducted by talking to neighbors and walking areas and see if she had been seen anywhere. And at the same time, we were trying to develop any potential suspects by talking to people that she routinely came in contact with.
A deputy interviewed a neighbor who lived across the street from the Wooldridges. He remembered seeing someone in front of their house that morning. At about 10:30, the neighbor spotted a man carrying a blue backpack heading towards the front door. He saw no one else outside after he returned from his errand a half hour later. He couldn't remember if Anita's car was gone by then. Deputies were left with only hunches as to what had happened.
We assumed that the worst could be an abduction, but we definitely knew we had a missing person. So we just wanted to at least, at the very outset, cover all the basics of preserving the crime scene, obtaining any evidence that we possibly could, and then start in the next stage of the investigation, which would be doing as much background on the victim and trying to identify a suspect in an abduction if that's what's happened.
After 24 hours and dozens of interviews, no one had seen Anita or her car. Detectives interviewed a man who was a friend of Anita's father.
Not really.
He claimed that he had spoken to Anita on the phone the morning that she disappeared.
Make sure this is the phone number that you had called.
The Wooldridges' records confirmed it.
Can you tell me about the phone conversation?
The man said he called at about 10:30 or so and asked to speak to Mr. Wooldridge.
Hey.
Anita said her father wasn't there and that she was the only one home. Before she could take a message, she asked him to hold on. Someone was at the door. Anita came back to the phone only to say she had to go. She did not say who had come to the house.
It's almost like you
Increasingly, detectives were convinced that Anita met with foul play.
Gotta go. Did you say who was up?
If this was a kidnapping, investigators suspected that whoever was responsible would make contact with the Wooldridges. Technicians tapped the family's phone line. They would be ready if a call came in. Investigators also began to search for anyone who might have had reason to harm Anita.
We had no immediate suspects other than we started looking into all those people that had been in contact with Anita recently.
Detectives interviewed Anita's co-workers at the shipping company. They claimed Anita didn't have any problems with anyone at the job. But they did remember something a few weeks before she disappeared. At a place where the employees often went to relax, Anita's co-workers saw a man approach Anita. He worked with them at the shipping company and had had several drinks before he started teasing Anita.
And not with you, thank you.
Anita was polite but clearly annoyed. The witnesses thought he didn't appear too happy that Anita had brushed him off.
Kind of swaggers up to her.
They added that the man had not shown up for work the day that Anita disappeared.
And you could tell by the look on her face she did not like it.
Detectives went to question the employee who was at home.
Disappearance of Anita? Yeah. And I'm investigating.
He claimed that his encounter with Anita in the restaurant was an innocent exchange.
We're friends, we're co-workers.
On the morning she disappeared, he said he came into work before his shift and explained to his supervisor that he needed the day off.
Well, not me. I didn't do anything.
He wanted to work on his
You're
car.
working on my car.
You're hiding?
His supervisor confirmed the alibi.
Sorry for the interruptions, but these are questions.
As the hours ticked by, family and friends posted missing persons flyers throughout the area.
If I could put one of these up in your window.
They asked for anyone to call with information about their daughter or her car.
Her or the car.
They also
I'd appreciate
contacted
it.
the media to spread the word beyond
We
Kokomo.
haven't heard a thing.
Air surveillance and concerned citizens fanned out across the rural region to assist officers in the search.
A lot of lanes and back roads are in the extreme portions of this county. We had volunteer groups. The Civil Defense actually went out and formed organized searches of wooded areas. We felt that if we could find her vehicle, that would give us some evidence to lead us in another direction.
48 hours after Anita had disappeared, Detective Rogers received a promising tip from the mother of one of Anita's friends. The woman reported that Anita was having problems with another co-worker at the shipping company. Anita said that the man had sexually harassed her on the job.
Packing the boxes up.
I see. You're doing a good job.
She was concerned enough to file a complaint against him. Anita told the mother that if she wound up in a dumpster somewhere, you would know who did it. Investigators hoped they could find her before it was too late. They knew every hour she was gone lessened the likelihood Anita would be found alive.
Did he say anything about...
Detectives returned to the shipping company. The supervisor told them that he had no record of a sexual harassment complaint filed against the employee.
He left on his own accord.
He added that the man had resigned 3 weeks earlier and left the state for college. The suspect remained on the list until detectives could determine his whereabouts at the time of Anita's disappearance. While the lead was being checked, investigators continued their search for suspects in the area. They asked Anita's boyfriend to take a lie detector test since his alibi could not be corroborated on the morning Anita went missing. The test consisted of only 2 questions. Did he have anything to do with the disappearance of Anita Wooldridge? And did he know where Anita could be found? He answered no to both, but was found to be deceptive. He remained a suspect, though police had no evidence with which to hold him. After 2 days of searching, investigators were no closer to finding the missing woman. And the chances that she was still alive decreased with each passing day. 2 days after 21-year-old Anita Woolridge disappeared from her suburban home in Indiana, Howard County sheriffs had identified her co-worker and her boyfriend as possible suspects in her abduction. Though evidence found at her house suggested that she'd been taken alive, investigators knew that time was against them. Detectives spoke to Anita's friends to find out more. Most conveyed that they didn't know anyone who would want to hurt Anita, especially her boyfriend. One friend, who had previously worked with Anita at a gym 2 years earlier, said that Anita was nice to everyone, including difficult people. She recalled a member from the gym whose behavior towards the women there was crass.
What's wrong?
His name was Victor Steele. They found him offensive.
Is that Steele? Yes.
But he remained undeterred. Steele bothered Anita in the same way.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. How about a towel?
Yeah, I'll take that.
But she remained characteristically polite when she rejected him, according to Detective Steve Rogers.
What did I do?
Anita was a personality that she was always very forgiving and willing to try to work with anyone, and that she had made an extra effort to try to get along with this individual.
The man's behavior never changed, and his membership was eventually terminated. Anita's friend remembered that Victor Steele lived in Howard County at the time. Investigators checked on Steele's background.
When his name came up, we were able to locate his name in the Indiana Sex Offender Registry and learned from that he had been convicted in Monroe County, I believe in 1984, of an abduction.
Though Detective Rogers didn't know if Steele had any contact with Anita in the past 2 years, he believed Steele was the most promising suspect so far. To substantiate his theory, the detective turned to retired FBI profiler Steve McVeigh for guidance.
He had 3 or 4 people that he had to look at as suspects. He's wanting to see if we can narrow these down and to give some focus to the case. He has limited resources, and certainly time was the most critical of those. And if we could focus, then we'd be a little bit better off.
The profiler examined the crime scene reports and the backgrounds of each suspect. 41-year-old Victor Steele's background stood out. The circumstances surrounding Steele's conviction 15 years earlier had many similarities to Anita's disappearance. In December of 1984, Steele had stalked a woman on an Indiana University campus where he was a student. One night, he waited outside for her boyfriend to leave. Like Anita, the young woman had previously turned down his advances. Knowing she was alone, Steele approached the house.
What are you doing?
When the woman answered her door, Steele pushed his way inside.
Just want to talk to you, that's all. Let me talk to you. Treat me terrible. I don't understand it.
He pulled a knife from a blue backpack and threatened to kill her if she did not submit to being raped.
He'd had contact with her. He didn't live all that far from her. He carried the backpack that he had, as same as in the first instance, which he used as a crime kit, where he brought his tape, his ropes, and whatever else that he was going to use. And that's very, very distinctive.
After raping her, he forced her to walk with him at knife point. He told her to act like they were lovers or else he would stab her. The profiler recognized that part of Steele's fantasy was to feel like he was her boyfriend.
He had hoped to make this gal love him, his victim love him. He didn't look at it as a rape. Now, 15 years later, if it were the same guy, he would have the same signature, but he would be more sophisticated about it.
Most importantly, Steele did not kill his victim.
Want to go?
He released her on the condition that she would not call the cops. She agreed. then ran to the nearest phone to call 911. Victor Steele was arrested hours later.
I think that he looks back on the case in 1984 as a mistake, that he was not thorough enough in indoctrinating her or winning her over as sufficiently as he thought he had. And then when he let her go, she identified him and sent him to prison.
Victor Steele served 8 years behind bars for first-degree rape and abduction. He was distraught over the conviction. In prison, Steele attempted suicide twice. If he had abducted Anita, he was not going to make the same mistake again.
Victor Steele wanted to find a lady that he could, in effect, make love him. And if he couldn't, if it didn't work, then he was prepared, in my opinion, to kill her. And so, love me or I'll kill you is a very succinct description of what went on in this case.
The profiler stressed the importance of not revealing the investigation to Steele. If the suspect felt police were on to him, he would probably kill Anita and himself. Kokomo City Detective Michael Holzapfel was called in to work undercover and help locate the suspect.
The task of finding him involved us immediately in doing a surveillance of his last known residence, which was the home of his mother, which was on the outskirts of our city here in Howard County.
2.5 days after Anita disappeared, police set up outside the Steele residence. No one was seen entering or leaving. They needed a way to find out who was inside without blowing their cover. A car parked in front might be their way in.
We observed that there was a vehicle for sale outside of his house. We seized on that as an opportunity to establish contact under a ruse of being interested in making the purchase of the car, recognizing that we wouldn't have to compromise our identity.
Posing as potential buyers, undercover officers wearing wires prepared to make contact with whoever was home. They had no idea if Steele or Anita were inside. The suspect might do anything to protect his freedom. Every moment's delay dwindled the possibility that Anita remained alive. In June of 1998, investigators searched for convicted rapist Victor Steele in the abduction of a missing Indiana woman. 2.5 days after her disappearance, police set up surveillance outside his last known residence. Undercover detectives posing as used car buyers planned to make contact with the 41-year-old suspect. Though each hour that passed decreased the victim's chances for survival, Kokomo City Detective Michael Holzapfel believed that there was still hope.
A sexual predator would enjoy a sense of self-assurance by way of his having made it from the scene with his captive victim. That probably presented a window of opportunity to us as investigators that she would still be kept alive.
Wired for their own safety, they knew that approaching the house may put the victim at risk if Victor Steele discovered that he was a suspect, according to retired FBI profiler Steve McVeigh.
I told him, tell your guys you've got to be extremely discreet in this whole investigation, although we must press because time is of the essence. We have to do it in such a way that it arouses absolutely zero suspicion on Victor's part. And if he had any suspicion whatsoever that he had come under suspicion of the police, then he would dispose of her.
An older woman answered the door. She told the undercover detectives that the car for sale belonged to her son, Victor. The detectives said they were ready to buy now and were invited inside to discuss the price and the vehicle's history. The mother claimed that her son had moved to Wisconsin a few weeks earlier. Without her permission or a warrant, detectives were unable to search the house independently. They believed she was not likely involved, but they weren't convinced that she wouldn't alert her son to the search. She added that Victor hadn't hooked up his phone yet in Wisconsin, so she had no way to reach him.
No, he's gonna call.
She would have to speak with him before she could set a price.
Sometime he's here. Sometime he's here.
The detectives promised to keep in touch and looked forward to speaking to the owner himself. The FBI profiler remained confident Victor Steele was the primary suspect.
We could not eliminate him, and in fact, the secure place that I thought he would have taken her to, and where he could spend a significant amount of time with her, might very well be in a totally different area where no one knew him at all, and no one would have any idea of looking for him there. And that he very likely had gone and prepared a place and had in fact come back and taken her without his mother ever even knowing it.
24-hour surveillance by undercover officers continued as other team members discreetly gathered more background on Steele. They learned he was unemployed and owned a red pickup, but they could not figure out where he was staying. With each passing day, pressure to find the suspect and the victim mounted upon Howard County Chief Detective Steve Rogers.
We wanted to find this young lady alive. People were looking at us and saying, well, gosh, can't you do something? And we weren't at liberty to talk about what we were doing and what we thought we could get done. We had to be very guarded with that information.
Victor Steele's credit card statements revealed that he had rented a truck in Indiana a few days before the crime. Company records showed that Steele had traveled 910 miles round trip. Investigators divided the distance in half and traced a 450-mile circle around Kokomo, Indiana. One town that intersected was La Crosse, Wisconsin. Steele's credit card records also showed that he purchased gas at a convenience store on the date he rented the truck. Detectives called the parent company to determine the store's location. It was near La Crosse, Wisconsin. They notified the FBI that it was likely Victor Steele had crossed state lines with the victim. FBI Special Agent David Fitzgerald of the Eau Claire, Wisconsin Resident Agency was assigned the case.
We were able to offer them the ability to bring in other agents if need be, to conduct investigation anywhere within the state of Wisconsin. And if things were going to lead out of the state of Wisconsin, the FBI is one of those agencies that has a network in place where we can contact people all over the country to help them out.
6 days after 21-year-old Anita Woldridge disappeared, her missing blue sedan was found close to her home on a suburban street in Howard County, Indiana. It was just a few miles from Steele's house. The car was unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators feared Anita's body might be stashed in the trunk. She was not there, but her red bathrobe was. Underneath, they found evidence that was more encouraging. Severed electrical ties.
This was a very important thing with the profiler. He indicated to us that if these had been used to secure her arms or legs, that when they were cut from her, that would be to assist her in getting out of the vehicle. There was a good possibility that she was at least alive when she was taken out of the trunk.
Detectives found no blood, seminal fluid, or other signs of struggle in the vehicle. Nor did they find fingerprints far into the car. From the driver's side window, they were able to lift what they believed was an elbow print. Technicians preserved it in the hopes it would match their suspect. Detective Rogers asked the profiler whether they should allocate a portion of his limited resources to the search in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Steve Rogers asked me if I thought it was worth him taking a troop of his people to Wisconsin to look for. We even had the name of a town where a gas purchase had been made. Now, that was really iffy. in terms of that specific town being exactly where he had her. That part I was not certain at all about, but we had nothing else at that point.
A contingent of Indiana detectives headed for La Crosse, Wisconsin, where they believed Steele had taken Anita. They met with Special Agent David Fitzgerald and La Crosse police at a command center in the city of 50,000.
They really didn't have any specific information that Victor was here and he was here now, nor did they have any specific information that the victim, Anita, was here and was here now. And they kind of looked at us and said, you guys must think we're crazy for being here. But, you know, they had been up for a day and a half and felt pretty strongly that something was going to happen in our area, and we were just there to help them.
Not wasting any time, that evening investigators split up into several teams, looking for Steele's red pickup truck on the streets of La Crosse until 4 in the morning. But without an address or even a general location of where Steele and his victim may be, the search was fruitless. Once again, they turned to FBI profiler Steve McVeigh to help eliminate locations.
They asked me whether they were looking for a victim or a dead body. I replied that it was most likely that she was still alive and would be as long as he thought he could control her, and that he was not under suspicion by the police. That he would keep her for a fairly significant amount of time. He would keep her in a place that he had absolute control over and felt totally secure.
Investigators clung to hope that a week after her disappearance, Anita Wooldridge was still alive. 7 days after 21-year-old Anita Wooldridge had disappeared from her suburban Indiana home, authorities believed it was possible that she was still alive. They suspected convicted rapist Victor Steele was holding her somewhere in La Crosse, Wisconsin, but Chief Detective Steve Rogers had no proof and no known address.
We had a hope that she was alive. We did not know that she was alive. This was our last-ditch effort to find her, in the sense of finding her alive, that we had to get there, set up a command post, and be ready for when we received the information where he could possibly be.
Remember us?
To get it, undercover detectives wearing hidden transmitters returned to Steele's last known residence, his mother's home in Howard County, Indiana. Posing as interested buyers for the suspect's used car out front, officers hoped to glean Steele's whereabouts from his mother. Kokomo City Detective Michael Holzapfel was aware of the danger.
Our concern was that if we were discovered making our inquiries regarding Victor Steele at this stage of the investigation, that we might be contributing to the murder of this victim, that it might place her life at immediate risk.
It was a risk they had to take. His mother maintained that she still didn't have a telephone number for her son in Wisconsin. But she did have an address. The undercover officer repeated the address out loud to his partner so it could be heard by detectives listening outside. They immediately called Chief Detective Steve Rogers at the FBI office in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Captain, I got the address.
My team people are in the street with the La Crosse Police Department and the La Crosse FBI, and I'm relaying this information, and at that particular point when I tell them, do you have a Clinton Street in La Crosse? And they looked at me rather strange and said yes. I said, that's where he's at.
FBI and La Crosse detectives arrived in minutes. They identified the red pickup truck parked outside as Victor Steele's.
As soon as Victor Steele's vehicle and residence were, in fact, under surveillance, I requested assistance with the local authorities there to go to a local court, local magistrate, and apply for a search warrant for the address on Clinton Street and for Victor Steele's vehicle and for the person of Victor Steele.
While they waited for the warrants, agents contacted the owner who lived close by to find out if Steele had in fact rented the house. He confirmed the suspect was his tenant. Steele had claimed that he wanted to turn the building into a bookstore. The landlord provided a sketch of the building's interior layout. He also gave the FBI a key to the front door.
Like so.
Outside the rental property, investigators consulted the FBI profiler. They asked him what the chances were that Steele was holding Anita inside the building. Profiler Steve McVeigh warned that if she was there, getting to her safely would be difficult.
They were trying to determine whether they needed to storm the place or whether that was even the place that he would have her or not. So I was confident he did in fact have her there. She would be very well secured. I did tell him that I thought there was at least a 50-50 chance that should they attempt to storm the place while he's there, that he would kill himself and kill her too.
Investigators had no way to confirm who was inside. If they waited to go in, they might be too late.
We were again calculating with the resounding thump of this clock ticking in the back of each of our minds and our hearts as to whether or not do we make an entry? Do we wait? Do we stage a surveillance, watch and wait? Do we go ahead and force an entry? That decision was in part made by us witnessing Victor Steele leave the residence.
After a week of searching, investigators got their first glimpse of the suspect. He climbed into his truck and drove away. The surveillance team followed, but decided it would be imprudent to stop him for questioning.
One of the risks that we did face is that, say, he had Anita at another location that was not the residence, and he decided that he did not want to cooperate with us, and he just left. He may never go to that place again, and we may never find Anita.
Agents tracked Steele to a lumber yard. A detective followed the suspect inside. Steele seemed interested in long planks of wood.
I witnessed him make purchase of lumber. That in itself was a chilling observation and bit of information to convey back to the surveillance team because we had thoughts in mind. What's he using lumber for? To make a cage, to make a coffin?
The detective reported back to the other investigators. They watched as Steele returned to his pickup with the lumber.
Check it out and call him on the way out.
Investigators continued their tale. Steele retraced the route he had taken from his rental property. They had to decide soon if they were going to risk stopping him without knowing for sure where he was going or where he had stashed Anita.
If he had her alive and she was somewhere else, he would have went to her by now. But since he had not been away from the residence to any other location, we felt strongly that if she was alive, that she would still be there at that residence.
They decided they weren't going to let Steele return to the rental property.
Take him down. Take
A
him
lacrosse
down.
detective radioed to a uniformed officer to stop the pickup. The decision would mean the difference between life and death for Anita Woolridge. 8 days after a 21-year-old Indiana woman was abducted from her home, the FBI and local authorities stopped the prime suspect in La Crosse, Wisconsin. They believed Victor Steele was holding Anita Woolridge in a rented house nearby, but they had no proof that she was there or that she was still alive. Since they did not have enough to arrest the suspect, a La Crosse police cruiser pulled the pickup to the side of the road on the pretense of a routine traffic stop. Then the FBI approached. Special Agent David Fitzgerald asked the suspect if he would assist in their investigation.
He wasn't under arrest, and I didn't want to make him feel like he was. I had no probable cause that I was aware of at that time to arrest Mr. Steele, and I just wanted to have a conversation with him.
Steele agreed to cooperate and accompanied agents back to the FBI office. The sex offender claimed to know nothing about Anita Woldridge's disappearance and lied about where he was living.
Mr. Steele indicated that he thought that he had been stopped by law enforcement officers for his failure to register as a sex offender in the state of Wisconsin. And he indicated that he had been in Wisconsin for a couple days and that he was staying in his truck.
At Steele's rental property, investigators prepared for entry. They would be ready when they got word the warrant was signed by a judge. It was a difficult wait for Detective Michael Holzak.
The greatest anxious moments of the investigation I would describe occurred in awaiting the arrival physically of a search warrant that was being then prepared at our command center. We had Victor Steele. He was no present threat to anyone. We didn't know what the condition or circumstance Anita was suffering at that moment.
They got the warrant. The entry team used the key provided by the landlord. They exercised extreme caution, aware that the place may be booby-trapped.
Anita, police!
Officers swept through the rooms, including the basement, announcing their presence. But the team heard no answer to their calls.
Closet clear. Closet clear!
It appeared they had been wrong. At the FBI office in La Crosse, an agent and detective continued their interview with Victor Steele. The suspect admitted that he once knew a woman named Anita from a health club, but he hadn't seen her for a while. Without Steele's cooperation, investigators realized they may never find Anita, and they didn't have enough to place him under arrest.
Again, Mr. Steele indicated that he couldn't help law enforcement officers. He talked about the fact that he was not under arrest, he was detained, and he basically said, do what you gotta do to get me out of here.
Anita! FBI!
In the last room, authorities spotted a large metal cabinet lying face up on the floor. Its doors appeared to be secured with a broken broom handle and a butter knife.
We didn't communicate verbally at that particular time, but the communication was clear that we wanted to be cautious of booby traps. We wanted to be cautious about disturbing evidence, but we needed to open that cabinet.
The team members believed, dead or alive, the search for Anita was at an end. They saw no suspicious devices attached to the box, nor did they hear movement from within. Carefully, they freed the cabinet's handles. After 8 days, Anita was alive.
It was hard for me to believe that it was really going to be over. And they opened the box and there's like 5 or 6 police officers standing there. And I'm like, thank God, take me home.
Anita Woldridge told her rescuers that though she was not gagged, she had been conditioned by Victor Steele not to call out.
He told me he might make fake noises, so if I would scream for help, then he would kill me. And then when the police actually came to the door, I was still afraid to scream because I thought he might be playing a tape or making it up.
She was handed over to the emergency medical technicians. Except for dehydration, she remained healthy even after her long ordeal. Victor Steele was placed under arrest for kidnapping and sexual assault. He remained unfazed.
Victor really was not remorseful about what he had done. It appeared to me that if there was any remorse, it was in the fact that he had been caught.
From the health club where you used to
Anita
work?
had little to eat during her captivity. She ate her first meal as she explained to investigators the events that began 8 days earlier. Victor Steele arrived at her home at about 10:30. She recognized him from the health club and invited him in. He told her he had been out riding a bike and asked if he could come in for a glass of water.
Didn't seem like a big deal that he came to the door. I knew he rode his bike everywhere, and I mean, it was really hot that day. And I just never second thought I was going to get him a glass of water, send him on his way.
Anita asked Steele to wait while she wiped up blood from the kitchen floor where she had cut herself earlier. When her back was turned, Steele drew a stun gun from his backpack.
I didn't know what was happening. It was all so fast, and I realized, like, I'm being attacked, and I started screaming, even though I knew no one's going to hear me. All the windows are shut and air conditioners are on. And then when he hit me in the stomach, it's just, I lost all control of my legs. Like, they just went limp.
Steele disguised himself in women's clothes before he left the house. He first grabbed the bedspread, then Anita's robe to cover her bound wrists.
Get in here and I don't hear anything out of you.
He tried to shove her out the kitchen window, but decided it was easier to walk her to the car.
Keep your mouth shut.
He locked her in the trunk. Before taking her to Wisconsin, he brought her to his mother's house and raped her.
I'd always thought I'd rather die than be raped, and then it was almost like survival mode took over my body. It was like, okay, we're gonna get through this, and I'm gonna do everything in my power not to die like this and have my parents with unanswered questions.
So, you understand me? Get in.
In La Crosse, Wisconsin, Steele showed her a metal wardrobe that would be her new home. He threatened to kill her if she tried to escape.
Don't you bother.
Anita agreed not to try, but Steele didn't trust her.
I'll take that board. I'll beat you with it.
He left a quarter on top of the wardrobe to indicate if she tried to get out.
I didn't like being confined like that, but at least if I was in there, I knew he couldn't touch me. But it also made it very dreadful every time I heard the box open, because I knew I was either going to have to play games with him or be raped, or he would just see him.
Anita returned home to the warm welcome of friends and family. Detective Michael Holzapfel was surprised the case ended as well as it had.
Having worked so many broken bodies, so many fractured stories, so many occasions that it didn't come out like you would wish, that you would hope. Although this young woman suffered an incredibly a devastating victimization, she's still alive, and people work together to support her in bringing her home alive.
Victor Steele acted as his own attorney in his January 1999 trial and was convicted of kidnapping, carjacking, and weapons possession. He was sentenced to life without parole and serves his time in the United States Penitentiary in Beaumont, Texas.
I think my goals in life are a little bit different. I never thought of doing anything in law enforcement, and now that's something I'm looking into, that I would like to do that to help other people. And it gives me a goal that, you know, I want other people like him off the streets. And so that's a little bit different than my original plan in life.
The life-changing experience would have shattered many others. But Anita Woldridge transcended her ordeal because of her strong personality and individual faith. She now hopes to become an FBI agent to help others as they helped her.